The jagged fork of lightning split the Montana sky like divine retribution, striking the drought-ridden grain field with such ferocity that Clara Covington screamed in terror. It was 1879, and everything she had worked for over the past 2 years was about to go up in flames. No. She cried out, watching in horror as the first stalks caught fire, the dry wheat becoming an instant inferno under the cloudless summer night. The drought had left everything like tinder, just waiting for a spark. Clara ran barefoot from her cabin porch, her nightdress fluttering around her ankles as she raced toward the well. At 22, she was no stranger to hardship, having inherited this land when her parents succumbed to fever the previous winter. This homestead was all she had left, and she wouldn't lose it without a fight. The flames were spreading with alarming speed, devouring her livelihood with each passing second. Clara worked the well pump frantically, filling a wooden bucket as tears streamed down her face. What could one woman do against such destruction? As if in answer to her unspoken prayer, the sound of pounding hooves cut through the night. A rider appeared at the edge of her property, silhouetted against the growing inferno. "Miss, get back." The deep voice called as the stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "That's my crop burning," Clara shouted back, defiant. "I won't stand by and watch it go." The stranger approached, and in the firelight, Clara could see his face clearly for the first time. Strong jaw covered with stubble, eyes that reflected the dancing flames, and a determined set to his mouth that matched her own desperation. "Mason Harrington," he said quickly, extending a calloused hand. "Saw the fire from my camp up the ridge. Your grain field's caught, but we might save part of it if we act fast." Clara took his hand briefly. "Clara Covington, it's just me here." Mason nodded once, surveying the situation with practiced eyes. "We'll need wet sacks, as many as you've got. The wind's blowing away from your cabin, thank the Lord, but this fire'll take your whole harvest if we don't stop it." Within moments, they were working side by side, Clara directing Mason to her limited supply of burlap sacks while she filled more buckets. Together they soaked the rough material, and Mason quickly explained their strategy. "We'll beat down the edges where the flames are smallest, try to create a break. Can't stop the heart of it, but maybe we can contain it." Clara nodded, her heart pounding with fear and determination. She'd lost too much already to surrender now. They rushed toward the burning field, the heat intensifying with each step. The night air, typically cool in the Montana Territory even in summer, now scorched their lungs as they approached the dancing wall of fire. Mason took position at what appeared to be the weakest point of the advancing flames. "Stay close, but don't take any chances," he warned, swinging his wet sack against the fire's edge with powerful blows. Clara mimicked his movements, choking on smoke but refusing to retreat. Each slap of the wet burlap sent up a cloud of steam and embers. The work was exhausting, the heat unbearable, but she wouldn't yield. For hours they fought, retreating occasionally to re-wet their sacks, their faces blackened with soot, arms aching with effort. Clara's thin nightdress was soaked with sweat and water, clinging to her form, but propriety was the least of her concerns as they battled the relentless flames. Near midnight, Mason spotted a dilemma. "Fires jumped to the east field," he shouted over the roar. "We need to split up." "I'll take it," Clara called back, already moving toward the new threat. Mason caught her arm. "No. Too dangerous alone. We stick together, tackle one section at a time." His touch was firm but gentle, and something in his eyes concern for her rather than just her property made Clara acquiesce. They worked methodically, moving from one section to another, beating back the flames until their arms felt leaden and their throats raw from smoke. The night seemed endless, each moment stretching into eternity as they fought their desperate battle. Around 3 in the morning, the heavens finally showed mercy. Clouds gathered overhead, and a light rain began to fall, intensifying gradually into a steady downpour. Clara tilted her face to the sky, letting the cool water wash away the grime and tears. Mason stood nearby, breathing heavily, his shirt torn and singed in places, revealing glimpses of muscled skin beneath. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice hoarse. "Without your help, I'd have lost everything." Mason nodded, removing his hat to let the rain cool his head. "Couldn't ride past and do nothing. Not my way." As dawn approached, they surveyed the damage. Nearly half of Clara's wheat had been destroyed, but the remainder stood intact, saved by their relentless efforts and the timely rain. "Where did you come from?" Clara asked as they walked back toward her cabin, exhaustion making her steps unsteady. "Don't recall seeing you before." "Passing through," Mason replied. "Was a ranch hand down in Wyoming, heading to the gold fields in Helena." Inside the cabin, Clara lit a lantern and set about making coffee, suddenly aware of her state of dress and appearance. She excused herself briefly, changing into a simple blue dress before returning to tend to their needs. Mason had removed his charred vest and was examining a burn on his forearm when she returned. "Let me," she said, fetching a jar of salve and clean cloths. As she tended to his wound, Clara noticed other scars across his tanned skin, evidence of a hard life lived. "You're good at this," Mason commented, watching her work. "Had practice. Out here, you learn to doctor yourself or suffer the consequences." The coffee percolated on the stove as the gray light of dawn filtered through the windows. Outside, steam rose from the scorched earth as rain continued to fall, a blessing from above. "What will you do now?" Mason asked, accepting the steaming cup she offered. Clara sighed, looking out the window toward her damaged field. "Keep going. Half a crop is better than none." "It'll be lean, but I'll make it through winter." "Alone?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. "Been managing since my parents passed. Not much choice in the matter." Mason studied her over the rim of his cup. "Brave woman, not brave, just stubborn." Clara managed a tired smile. "Like these homesteads. They don't yield easily." When the rain finally stopped, Mason helped Clara assess the full extent of the damage. The blackened section of field was a harsh reminder of how close she'd come to total ruin. "I should be moving on," Mason said as noon approached, though he made no move toward his horse. Clara surprised herself by saying, "There's work to be done here if you're willing. Could use the help, and I can offer meals and a place in the barn in return." Mason looked toward the horizon, then back at the diminutive woman who had fought alongside him through the night. Something in her determination had touched him. "Might delay my journey a spell," he agreed. "Gold's been in the ground a long time. Reckon it'll wait a bit longer." Over the following days, a rhythm developed between them. Mason repaired fences damaged by the fire and helped salvage what crops he could. Clara cooked hearty meals and tended to the vegetable garden that had thankfully been spared. They spoke little at first, both accustomed to solitude, but gradually conversation flowed more freely during evening meals on the porch, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. "How'd you end up here alone?" Mason asked one evening, a week after the fire. "Most women wouldn't take on a homestead without family." Clara's hands stilled in her lap. "Wasn't the plan. My father staked this claim 3 years ago. Mother and I followed a year later. We were going to build something lasting." She looked across the land, seeing not what was, but what should have been. The fever took them both within days of each other last December. By the time the doctor from town arrived, it was too late. "I'm sorry," Mason said softly. "Neighbors suggested I sell, move back east to my mother's sister. But this land was their dream. Couldn't bear to let it go." Mason nodded, understanding the attachment to a place that represented more than just soil and structures. "My father had a small spread in Texas, lost it in the war. Taught me never to put down roots too deep. And yet here you are, helping a stranger protect her roots." Their eyes met in the fading light, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition of kindred spirits despite their different paths. The next morning, Clara found Mason repairing her plow, which had been damaged before the fire and left neglected. "Won't be needing that till spring," she commented, bringing him a cup of water. "Best to fix things when you have the chance," he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "Never know what tomorrow brings." Clara watched him work, admiring the efficiency of his movements. "You know farming, grew up on it, can ride and rope with any cowhand, but a man should know how to coax life from the soil too." That afternoon, they rode together to the nearby town of Willow Creek for supplies. Clara was conscious of the looks they received. A single woman in the company of an unknown man would always invite speculation. Mrs. Peterson at the general store didn't bother hiding her curiosity. "Heard about your fire, Miss Covington. Providential that you had help. Mr. Harrington has been kind enough to assist with repairs," Clara said formally, though she felt a flush rising in her cheeks. "Indeed." Mrs. Peterson's eyes moved assessingly between them. "Will he be staying long?" "Just passing through," Mason answered before Clara could respond. "Helping out where needed." On the ride back, Clara was quieter than usual. "Town gossip bothering you?" Mason finally asked. "People will talk regardless. It's not that." She adjusted her hat against the afternoon sun. "Just realized I don't know much about you, beyond your name and that you're headed to the gold fields." Mason rode silently for a moment. "Not much else to tell. Mother died when I was young, father after the war. Been working ranches since I was 16, saving for a stake of my own. And the gold fields will provide that stake. That's the hope. Though plenty find nothing but disappointment there." Clara studied his profile. "You don't seem the type to chase dreams." "Everyone chases something, Miss Covington. Just a question of what we're willing to risk to catch it." As they approached the homestead, the contrast between the burned section and the surviving wheat stood stark against the landscape. But rather than desolation, Clara felt a stirring of hope for the first time since the lightning struck. That evening, a summer storm gathered on the horizon. Clara and Mason sat on the porch watching the distant lightning, both remembering the night they'd met. "At least the fields are too wet to burn now," Clara said, though she shivered at the memory. "Nature gives and takes with the same hand," Mason observed. "Same rain that saved your crop could wash out the road to town if it's heavy enough." The storm moved closer, bringing with it gusting winds that rattled the cabin's shutters. When the first heavy drops began to fall, they retreated inside, the small space suddenly intimate in the lantern light. Clara busied herself making tea, aware of Mason's presence behind her like a physical touch. When she turned, cup in hand, she found him standing closer than expected, his eyes reflecting the lantern flame. "Should check on my horse," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Make sure the barn's secure." He stepped out into the downpour, leaving Clara with confusing thoughts. She had grown accustomed to his presence too quickly, finding comfort in sharing her daily tasks with someone again. But Mason was temporarily a drifter with plans that led away from Montana, away from her. The storm intensified overnight, rain pounding the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Clara woke before dawn, sensing something amiss. A strange sound carried over the storm's fury, the distressed lowing of cattle. Dressing quickly, She grabbed her father's old rifle and ventured onto the porch. Through the rain, she could make out movement near the corral, several head of cattle that weren't hers milling about in confusion. The barn door opened and Mason emerged, rifle in hand. He spotted her and motioned for her to stay back as he approached the unfamiliar livestock. "Strays," he called over the storm's noise. "Must have broken through someone's fence in the storm." As they investigated further, they discovered a dozen cattle bearing the Circle M brand from the neighboring ranch 5 miles over. Mitchell's stock, Clara identified them. Storm must have spooked them badly to drive them this far. "We'll need to contain them until it passes," Mason said, already moving toward the corral gate. "Then get word to Mitchell." Working together in the driving rain, they managed to herd the frightened cattle into her corral. Clara's dress was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but a sense of exhilaration filled her as she and Mason moved in unspoken coordination, anticipating each other's actions. When the last steer was secured, they stood in the downpour, breathless and laughing with the unexpected adventure. "You handle yourself well," Mason said, rainwater streaming down his face. "Told you I'm not helpless," Clara replied, suddenly aware of how close they stood, how his eyes lingered on her face. A crack of thunder broke the moment, and they hurried back to the shelter of the cabin. Inside, Clara built up the fire while Mason shed his soaked coat. "You should change," he said, politely turning his back as she gathered dry clothes. When Clara returned from the small bedroom, Mason had coffee brewing and had draped their wet garments near the fire to dry. "Storm might last through morning," he observed, looking out the window at the pre-dawn darkness. "Mitchell will be worried about his cattle." Clara accepted the coffee he offered, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. "We should try to get word to him once it's light." "I'll ride out if the rain lets up." Mason settled into a chair, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "His son helped me when my horse threw a shoe last year. Good family." Clara sat across from him, cradling her cup. "You've passed through here before," Mason nodded. "Twice. Different route each time, but this territory has a way of drawing a man back." "Is that why you stopped to help with the fire? Familiarity with the area?" "No." His eyes met hers steadily. "Would have stopped regardless. Some things a man can't ride past." The intensity of his gaze made Clara's heart quicken. She looked away, focusing on the fire's dance instead of the answering flame within her. As morning broke, the storm gradually subsided to a gentle rain. Mason prepared to ride to the Mitchell ranch, borrowing Clara's oilskin coat against the weather. "Should be back by midday," he said, checking his rifle before mounting his horse. "Don't go near those cattle alone, they're still skittish." Clara nodded, touched by his concern. "Be careful. The creek might be high with all this rain." She watched him ride away, a strange emptiness settling in her chest as he disappeared into the mist. In such a short time, Mason Harrington had become a fixture in her world, as essential as the roof over her head or the land beneath her feet. While he was gone, Clara baked bread and made a hearty stew, keeping her hands busy to quiet her mind. She found herself glancing repeatedly toward the window, watching for his return. Midday came and went with no sign of Mason. As afternoon wore on, Clara's concern grew. The rain had stopped, but the creek that separated her property from the Mitchell ranch could become treacherous after heavy storms. By late afternoon, she was pacing the porch when she finally spotted 2 riders approaching Mason, accompanied by young Tom Mitchell, the rancher's son. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by embarrassment at the strength of her reaction. She composed herself before they reached the cabin, greeting them with appropriate hospitality. "Miss Covington," Tom greeted her, tipping his hat. "Pa sends his thanks for corralling our strays." We lost a section of fence in the storm." "It was no trouble," Clara replied. "Mr. Harrington did most of the work." Tom glanced between them with poorly concealed curiosity. "Mason says you two fought a fire together. Quite a story." After inspecting the cattle, Tom prepared to drive them home, refusing Clara's invitation to stay for supper due to his father expecting his return. "You should join us for Sunday dinner," Tom said as he mounted up. "Pa would like to thank you properly, and my sister Mary makes the best apple pie in the territory." Clara glanced at Mason, uncertain. "That's very kind, but we'd be honored," Mason interrupted smoothly. "Weather permitting." After Tom departed with the cattle, Clara turned to Mason with raised eyebrows. Mason had the grace to look sheepish. "Presumptuous of me, but a home-cooked Sunday meal is hard to refuse." "I cook for you every day," Clara pointed out, though a smile tugged at her lips. "And magnificently," Mason assured her. "But social calls are good for the spirit. You've been isolated here too long." Clara couldn't argue with that assessment. Since her parents' deaths, she had withdrawn from the community, focusing solely on survival. Perhaps it was time to rejoin the world of the living. The next few days passed in peaceful productivity. Mason continued making improvements around the homestead, while Clara tended to her remaining wheat and prepared for eventual harvest. They fell into an easy rhythm, working separately but coming together for meals and evening conversation. On Saturday evening, Clara found Mason carving something on the porch steps, wood shavings gathered around his boots. "What are you making?" she asked, settling beside him with her mending. Mason turned the piece in his hands, a small wooden horse taking shape under his knife. "Just keeping my hands busy. My grandfather taught me, said idle hands find trouble." "It's beautiful," Clara admired the emerging details. "You have an artist's touch." "Hardly." Mason chuckled but looked pleased at the compliment. "Just something to pass the time on long trails." "Do you ever get lonely?" The question escaped before Clara could consider its implications. "On those trails, I mean." Mason set down his carving, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. "Sometimes. Nature's good company, but man wasn't made to be solitary forever." He glanced at her. "What about you, out here alone?" "Yes," Clara admitted quietly, "though I've grown accustomed to it." "Or I had until what?" "Until you showed up and reminded me what companionship feels like." The admission hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Mason's expression softened, and he reached out slowly, as if approaching a skittish colt, to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Clara," he said, the first time he'd used her given name. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of approaching riders. Both turned to see 3 men on horseback approaching the homestead. Mason stood, instinctively moving in front of Clara. "Expecting visitors?" "No," Clara replied, squinting to identify the riders in the fading light. Recognition dawned and her body tensed. "That's Ernest Blackwell and his brothers. Trouble. He's been trying to buy my land since my parents died. Owns the largest ranch in the county and wants to expand." Clara's voice hardened. "Doesn't believe a woman can manage a homestead alone." Mason's jaw tightened as the riders approached. "Well, you're not alone at present." The Blackwell brothers reined in before the porch, Ernest in the lead, his expression darkening at the sight of Mason. "Miss Covington," Ernest greeted her without removing his hat. "Heard about your fire. Shame about your crop." "Half of it survived, Mr. Blackwell," Clara replied coolly. "I'll manage." Ernest's gaze shifted to Mason. "Don't believe we've met." "Mason Harrington," he replied, not extending his hand. "Passing through," Ernest surmised. "Miss Covington, my offer still stands." After this setback, might be time to reconsider selling to someone who can manage this land properly. Clara felt Mason tense beside her but placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Blackwell. This land isn't for sale." Ernest dismounted, approaching the porch steps. His brothers remained mounted, watching silently. "Be reasonable. You're facing a hard winter with half a crop. I'm offering fair market value." "She said no," Mason interjected, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Ernest's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your concern, Drifter. This is between me and the lady." "The lady has made her position clear," Mason replied, standing his ground. For a tense moment, Ernest seemed ready to escalate the confrontation. Then he smiled coldly. "Well now, Miss Covington, taking in strays, are we? Tongues are already wagging in town." Clara stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your concern for my reputation, misplaced though it is. But if you're quite finished, we were about to have supper." Ernest's face flushed with anger, but he retreated to his horse. "My offer won't last forever. When winter comes and you're struggling, remember I tried to be generous." The brothers rode away, Ernest casting a final dark look over his shoulder. "Charming neighbors," Mason commented when they were out of earshot. "Ernest has wanted this land since before my father claimed it," Clara explained. "Good water access and fertile soil. He can't accept being refused, especially by a woman." "Man like that doesn't give up easily," Mason observed. "You've been dealing with his pressure alone all this time." Clara nodded. "He was more subtle when my parents were alive. Since their passing, his visits have become more frequent and less courteous." That night, Clara lay awake longer than usual, replaying the interrupted moment with Mason before the Blackwells arrived. What had he been about to say? And why did it matter so much? Sunday dawned clear and bright, perfect for their planned visit to the Mitchell ranch. Clara dressed in her best dress, a blue calico with white trim that had been rarely worn since her mother's funeral. She pinned her hair more carefully than usual, and even added a touch of her mother's rosewater behind her ears. When she emerged from her bedroom, Mason was waiting on the porch, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He stared at her for a moment before finding his voice. "You look lovely," he said simply. Clara felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. Shall we go?" The Mitchell ranch was larger than Clara's homestead, boasting a substantial herd of cattle and several outbuildings surrounding a two-story main house. They were greeted warmly by the entire family: Mr. Mitchell, his wife, and their 3 children. "Miss Covington, we've missed seeing you in town," Mrs. Mitchell said, embracing Clara. "And Mr. Harrington, we're grateful for your help with our strays." The day passed pleasantly, with good food and better conversation. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn out of her shell by the family's genuine warmth and Mason's steady presence at her side. After dinner, Tom Mitchell showed them recent improvements to the ranch while Mary and Mrs. Mitchell cleared the table. Mr. Mitchell pulled Mason aside for a private conversation that Clara couldn't overhear. Later, as they prepared to leave, Mr. Mitchell addressed them both. "Heard Blackwell's been pressuring you to sell, Clara. Man's got no shame trying to profit from your hardship." "He'll have a long wait," Clara replied firmly. "I'm not selling." Mr. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit, but winter's coming and with half a crop. Well, neighbors should look out for each other. Tom and I will come by next week, help you prepare for harvest." "That's very kind, but no arguments," Mrs. Mitchell interrupted. "We would have come sooner if we'd known you were fighting fires alone." On the ride home, Clara was quiet, processing the day's events and the unexpected offer of help. "Good people," Mason commented, breaking the comfortable silence. "Yes," Clara agreed. "I've kept to myself too much since my parents died. Pride, I suppose, or fear of appearing weak." "Accepting help isn't weakness," Mason said. "It's wisdom." They crested the rise overlooking Clara's homestead, bathed in the golden light of sunset. The cabin looked small against the vastness of the Montana landscape, but it was home, her anchor in a world of uncertainty. "Beautiful," Mason murmured, though when Clara glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the scenery. That night, sitting on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Clara finally asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "How much longer will you stay?" Mason was silent for so long that Clara feared she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Been asking myself the same question. Originally planned to reach Helena before the first snow. And now," Mason turned to face her fully, "now I'm wondering if gold is what I've been searching for all along." Clara's heart quickened. "What else might you be seeking? A place that feels like home, someone to share it with." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Never expected to find either, helping a stubborn woman beat back flames." Clara's breath caught. "Mason, I know it's sudden," he continued. "We've known each other barely 3 weeks, but some things don't need time to be certain." "What are you saying?" Clara hardly dared believe where this was leading. "I'm saying I care for you, Clara Covington. More than I thought possible in such a short time. And if you'll have me, I'd like to stay, not in your barn, not as hired help, but as a partner in whatever life brings." Clara stared at him, searching for any sign of doubt or insincerity, but found only honest emotion in his steady gaze. The realization of her own feelings washed over her with sudden clarity. "I care for you too," she whispered. "Have since that first night, I think." Mason's smile in the moonlight was worth every hardship she'd endured. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished, but Clara met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as months of solitude and longing found release. When they finally parted, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer yet. No gold, no grand ranch, just these hands and a promise to build something lasting with you." "That's more than enough," Clara assured him. "This land has good bones. Together we can make it thrive." The following weeks brought changes to the homestead. With the Mitchells' help, they harvested the surviving wheat, storing enough to see them through winter with some to sell in town. Mason constructed additional fencing and repaired the roof before the first autumn chill. Word spread through the community about the couple who had fought fire together and found love in its aftermath. Neighbors who had kept their distance during Clara's solitude now visited regularly, bringing wedding gifts and offers of assistance. Ernest Blackwell made one final attempt to purchase the land, this time approaching Mason directly while Clara was in town. His offer was substantial, but Mason's refusal was immediate and final. "This isn't just land," Mason told him. "It's Clara's heritage and our future. No amount of money can replace that." Blackwell departed in anger, but they heard rumors later that he had set his sights on property farther north, apparently recognizing the futility of his pursuit. They were married on a crisp October day, with the Mitchells hosting the celebration at their ranch. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by Mrs. Mitchell's skilled hands, and carried wildflowers gathered from the hillside where Mason had first spotted the fire. Reverend Hollies, who had traveled from town for the occasion, spoke of foundations built on solid ground, of love forged in adversity, and of 2 lives intertwined like wheat stalks in a summer field. As winter settled over Montana territory, Clara and Mason Harrington sat before their cabin fireplace, planning spring plantings and dreaming of the years ahead. Outside, the land rested beneath a blanket of snow, waiting for renewal. "You ever regret not going to the gold fields?" Clara asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. Mason smiled, stroking her hair gently. "What's gold compared to this? Some men search their whole lives for treasure and never realize it's not always found in the ground. Clara looked around their small cabin, humble but filled with warmth and promise. Who would have thought lightning striking our field would bring such blessing? Providence works in mysterious ways, Mason agreed, drawing her closer. One spark destroys, another creates. The same night that threatened everything you had brought me everything I needed, Clara finished, turning in his arms to kiss him. As snow fell softly outside their window, they held each other close. Two souls who had found in each other a shelter more enduring than any homestead, a wealth more precious than any gold, and a love born of fire that would warm them all their days.